So I've been poking around on my hard drive at some of the files that I've picked up over the years for RPG stuff, and some of the things I've literally never seen before. And one of the things I've noticed as I'm kind of poking around in here, I'm up to the T's by now, um, is that lots of folks will do fan-based creations of games built around franchises that don't actually have role-playing games for the tabletop community. In fact, the one I just looked at right now is the Dark Water. It was a cartoon, and they created their entire own role-playing game for this. It was like 80 pages long or something like that. And it got me thinking: is it better to generate an entire game around an original property that doesn't have a tabletop role-playing game, or is it better to do a conversion of that setting to an existing set of rules? Which is easier? Now, if you're going to create your own game, you have to create it around the known canon of that setting. So you have to know what the canon is. You have to write it all down. And now you have to figure out, how does the world work for these things to exist? And one of the problems with that is that the main characters in any franchise often have abilities well beyond what the rest of the universe possesses. Even if they have established rules that state, you have to do A, B, C to get results 1, 2, 3, somehow the player characters, the main characters of the series, will bend the system a little and achieve ends that otherwise could not be achieved. And sometimes you can hand wave them and you can say, oh, they used action points or something like that. And I personally am not a big fan of player currency. I prefer to have sets of rules set up so that if one person can do something, then someone else can do something. I don't want favoritism played just because someone is the main character as opposed to someone being an NPC. It should be fairness across the board. The success should come about with good planning, expertise, and of course a smidge of luck when it comes to the dice roll. So if you have to build your entire game around the canon of the player characters, that's going to be slightly different than the canon of the non-player characters, of the supporting cast. Because the supporting cast in a television series or an animated series or a film franchise simply aren't as powerful as the main characters. If they were as powerful as the main characters, they would be the main characters. And so that gives you a hurdle. How do you square that circle between what the world says can happen and what the writers say that the main characters can do in the world that they have created? Because those two things are not always in line with each other. Now, the other side of the argument is that you just convert existing franchises, whether it's a TV series or animated series or a movie franchise or what have you, or for novels and things like that or comics for that matter, that haven't seen a translation into a tabletop role-playing game. Converting them to an engine can be difficult because now you may have to go, okay, which is the best engine? And that's going to cause a massive discussion in any forum, gaming forum. You're going to be finding all kinds of people who will be willing to argue with you on that one. But even if you can achieve a consensus, how close to the canon of that franchise or that setting is even the best set of rules going to be? You may get close, but to make the setting you want to use in that engine, you may have to alter the canon slightly to get it to fit. So now, are you actually going to be playing the series setting that you've always wanted to play? Or are you playing something that's close to? You're playing, something inspired by your favorite role-playing game, as opposed to actually, or rather your favorite franchise, rather than actually your favorite franchise. And I'm sure good players and good GMs could be able to come up with a way of achieving, getting closer and closer as they, or as they say, adding zeros. You're getting more and more accurate, but you're also going to be spending more and more energy for each one of those degrees of accuracy. And at some point, you just have to step back and say, okay, it's not worth it. Now, I'm coming at this from the perspective of a crafter. I make things with my hands. And I've come to realize that there is a degree of accuracy I would love to have, but I do not possess the equipment to achieve it. If I had a lathe, a metal turning lathe, or yeah, I would probably, a metal turning lathe would probably solve most of my problems, though having a wood cut turning lathe as well would probably be a bonus, or finding a really big one that I could use for both. Because realistically, I'd like to be able to turn objects the size of baseball bats. And a mill, a good quality mill. It doesn't even have to be electronically controlled, just a good quality mill, because it's going to be able to achieve a far greater degree of control and power and torque and accuracy than my Craftsman drill press can. I can't achieve that degree of control, that degree of accuracy. So while I'm crafting, I'm trying to get things to be as good as I can because of my own personal expectations, my own perfectionism, but also because it makes other things easier. If I can get this component to be exactly the same as that component, it's going to mean that when the components have to come together, they come together successfully. Well, guess what I've discovered? I can't do that. I don't have the equipment to make two different pieces of items that are going to have the same degree of accuracy. I don't have a mill. Even a manual mill would let me do this. I don't have one. I have my eyes and tape measures and calipers and a drill press or a hand drill and an angle grinder. And those tools will let me get to a certain degree of accuracy, but no closer. So rather than trying to create two things of the same, which is an endlessly frustrating prospect, I've changed the way I come up with problems. So if I can make one thing, if I have to make two of something, I'll make one thing. I will then use that thing as the guide to make the second thing. So I'm not even laying anything out on the second item. There's no line, there's no nothing. I don't have to. I've made the first one, and even if the first one isn't perfect, because I'm using it as a template, it means the second one is going to be really close to the first one, and you're still not going to get the same degree of accuracy you could with a mill. But it's close enough. And it's saved me so much frustration. It has saved me so many problems. If I make this thing, and then I make the second thing match the first thing, and if I'm careful, that means when I have to bring the next component in, the level of variance in these two should not affect how this component comes in to have one, because I have to marry these three things together. And occasionally I'll have a hole or a thing that doesn't work, and you know something? I make it function at the spot, and it's not as pretty as it could have been. Screw it. My particular aesthetic will allow that level of variance and be happy with it. But at a certain level, you have to just say, we're close enough. So is the conversion model the best way to go? Because you're already got the system set up right in front of you. And yes, I am well aware that no gamer in the history of the universe has ever looked at a rule system and said they were completely happy with it. We have always house ruled things. Most of us have probably been house ruling things as we were reading the rules for the first time. Because we realized, well, that right there, that doesn't work for me. That doesn't make any sense, because I'm looking at these other rules you got here, and there just seems to be they're doing this, they're not doing this. So, okay, I'll get this result. I'm not quite getting this result, but I'll get this result. It's close to what I want. We'll run with it. So I'm just fascinated by this concept because I'm looking at these different game products I'm seeing, and people are doing both of the models. They're converting existing canons to existing rules, or they're coming up with their completely own original games built around that canon franchise concept. And I can't figure out which is the best method, because the first method may get you very close, but you're also creating a hothouse flower. You're creating something that's very unique, going to get no exposure, and it's going to not be as approachable and maintainable by most gamers, because they're not going to want to have to make that hurdle to learn a new system just to play that franchise, that setting. Whereas if you do a conversion to an existing system, that particularly one that's popular, well, you've got an audience out there that's already ready, willing, and able to play it. So if you can just hand them the conversion material, you're good to go. I mean, Mutants and Mastermind is an incredibly good set of rule systems, but so is the DC universe. And I've seen people doing conversions for both of them, converting like Marvel characters to the DC rules, or creating Mutants and Mastermind versions of characters from all kinds of different comic settings, converting them into the system that they want to play in. I mean, I've got the Mutants and Mastermind, the DC hero references up on my shelf, and they're awesome. But when you're reading them, you're already going, well, you know, I could use this to create Iron Man real easy, or I could do that to create, you know, Zatanna or Doctor Strange or something. You're doing it in your head while you're reading. And I've seen lots of fan creations out there. People are doing all kinds of conversions for superheroes because they're a very popular genre. And all of us have our favorite superhero game, yet we want to introduce characters to them. So we have to do a conversion, because it's a lot easier than come up with an entirely brand new game system for that hero comic, that comic line. So I know I'm blathering a bit here, and this is a deeply philosophical discussion, I think, I think it actually goes beyond the realm of tabletop role-playing games, because it's really about coming at a problem from two different directions that are fundamentally very different. And which is the best method? And I personally think that it's probably going to be the conversion. I think that's the lowest hurdle, because that's closest to what I'm doing in my shop. I'm making this thing fit the existing thing, because the existing thing has had more work put into it. I've got everything in this thing I really want, and I want to add this component, so it's a lot easier to bring this component in, fit it to here, than try to wrap this thing to this new component, which may require me to rebuild it fundamentally to get it to fit that second one. So I guess I'm talking about games and design. And I know there's probably a narrow audience for that particular discussion, but I know you're out there because I've had conversations with you. So for the 5 people that really think this is interesting, tell me what you think.